who's ready to go bowling? And I'm not talking about 10 pins and a 12-pound ball. I'm talking about a whole gang of Clemson Tigers and a bunch of mangy Wildcats. It is almost time for the Gator Bowl, coming up in 2 days between the Clemson Tigers and the Kentucky Wildcats, and that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of Around the Paw. I'm Garrett Mitchell, along with Griffin Barfield and Clifton Kennedy, as always, and we have a very special guest joining us tonight. It's Scott Reimer from the Tiger PreGame Show on 105.5 The Roar. And Scott, welcome in. It's great to have you, man. And I'll tell you what, this is royalty. We've got royalty on the episode this week.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me Around the Paw. This is awesome. I enjoy this kind of stuff, and I definitely enjoy talking Clemson football and Clemson athletics and Clemson history. So I know we'll do a lot of all that, but it's an honor to be on Around the Paw. Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you've been the host of the Tiger PreGame Show since 2003, so over 20 years now. And this coming Friday, it's your 281st consecutive show. Is that right?
That's right. It's been a time, if you will. 2003. You guys are all young, so you may not remember this season. It was a very traumatic season. It went up and down, and had some low points for sure. And then certainly had some high points to finish the season, but that was the first year, and it was just kind of born out of the radio station at the time, 104.9 FM in Clemson, looking to do a pregame show for Clemson athletics, and I've kind of been around with it the whole time. We've had co-hosts come and go, from Roy Philpott to Kelly Gramlich, and now William Quackenbush. I've kind of seen it all, the good, the bad, the championships, and here we are headed for the TaxSlayer Bowl.
Right, and you always do such a great job. So everybody, if you hadn't planned to already, tune in at you see you 3 hours before game time, right? So 9 a.m. on Friday.
No. We're way earlier than that. So
yeah, I was about to say.
so get up. So everybody, get up and put your coffee on. Get that cup of coffee and tune in. You've been given a direct order.
That's right. It's breakfast with the Tiger PreGame Show. We're from 6. We always are 6 hours prior to kickoff up until 3 hours prior to kickoff, and then I go and tailgate with my family and do all that kind of stuff at the games. So this Saturday or Friday, I guess, because we're not going to play on Saturday. This Friday it'll be 6 a.m. until 9 a.m. 105.5 The Roar, at 105.5 The Roar on Twitter, all that kind of stuff. All it takes is a simple Google. You can find us. Look forward to you guys tuning us in.
We'll be there for sure. Now, since we're not a 6-hour show, we're going to just go ahead and jump right into it. So we've got a lot to talk about in a shorter amount of time. So Scott, from your perspective and what you're hearing, just go ahead and jump right in. What are you hearing in terms of the overall state of the Tigers and the state of the team health-wise, and who all is going to be there and available when kickoff comes at noon on Friday?
Well, I think that, Garrett's the question of the day. I mean, I think if these two teams played 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, when Clemson was playing its best football down the stretch, I think Clemson will be a prohibitive favorite against Kentucky. But a lot has changed since the Tigers defeated South Carolina in Columbia. I mean, Rukaroro's gone. Wiggins is gone, to the NFL. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is gone. And then you got all these guys that are doing the transfer portal stuff, including Andrew Makuba, Sage Ennis, Bo Collins. This is a different Clemson team, especially in the secondary that played in Columbia a couple of weeks ago, or now almost a month ago. So, I think and Kentucky has benefited from losing less people to the draft and to the portal. So I think this game has tightened up because of the fact that Clemson has some very key players that aren't going to play on Friday. And I think that's the storyline going in terms of how do you kind of size this game up? It's Clemson in mid-November versus Clemson in December the 29th. I mean, those are two different football teams.
Yeah, no doubt. And Griffin, that kind of segues into the next thing that I was going to talk about. And that's it comes to a point where you can't so much harp on the players who aren't going to be there, and you talk about the players who will be. And it's true that Clemson is losing a lot of experience, either to opt-outs, players who are going pro, or players who have gone into the transfer portal. But what you have left are some young guys, and particularly, Scott, you mentioned in the secondary. Well, you've still got all of those true freshmen that really flashed by midseason and were just putting up spectacular games left and right on the heels of one another. And so that gives me a lot of confidence on the defensive side of the ball that the secondary can still play well. When you've got guys like Khalil Barnes and Avion Terrell, Kylon Griffin, you still got some dudes back there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is a very optimistic approach in terms of the secondary. A.V. Terrell and Shelton Lewis have made plays as of late, even in the secondary. Khalil Barnes, obviously, he scored Clemson's only touchdown in their last game. But yeah, I think the lack of depth could be something that could be a point of emphasis for Kentucky when they're looking at Clemson. But obviously, we know the talent that these guys have had. And I mean, for me, I don't see it as that much of a problem. I think that these guys are going to get it done. But I know Kentucky's got some great receivers. 3 receivers had 400 or more yards this season. And then, of course, they're led by Devin Leary, who played for NC State seasons ago. He gave Clemson a loss in 2021 in Raleigh. So he knows how to beat Clemson. So it should be a great matchup all around, no matter what.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's funny how during the season, I guess because we had all these experienced players behind all these freshmen, but I feel like I'm hearing that people aren't trusting our freshmen. I don't know what do you think about that, Scott?
Well, I trust the freshman. I think Khalil Barnes has had one of the best freshman seasons of any Clemson defender in a long time, and I think the stats will say that. He'll be the only player under Dabo Swinney. He could be, if he gets a fumble or an interception, to have multiple fumble interceptions in more than 3 games as a freshman. He's been spectacular. Really the game changed in the first 3 minutes in Columbia because of Khalil Barnes. I mean, he picks up the scoop and score and then intercepts the next play from Spencer Rattler. So I certainly think, he's a guy that you can trust. And Clemson did trust. If you go back, Khalil Barnes had some big plays earlier in the season. It wasn't just the end of the season when he was spectacular. The thing is the depth. I mean, and that's where in the secondary, especially the secondary, I think everywhere else up front and at the linebacker position, I think you've got some options there. I just think in the secondary, it's a matter of the depth. And if anybody gets banged up or if you have to play a lot of games, here's the great thing, though. This is not Tennessee in the Orange Bowl last year. Kentucky is one of the slowest teams in college football, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. They slow the game down. They don't run a whole lot of clock. There's been some talk they may try to do that this week because they understand Clemson's issues defensively, especially in the secondary in terms of depth. But it's not their DNA. They're not going to run a lot of plays. So I think that helps Clemson in terms of the depth. It's not as big of a deal when you're not running 80 or 90 plays as it is 50 or 60 plays. So I think the matchup against Kentucky, especially on Kentucky's offensive side versus Clemson defense, is minimized. The loss of the guys like Makuba and so forth is minimized because of who you're playing as opposed to who those guys are that you're losing.
Right, and we're going to, in a few minutes, we're going to go a little more in depth and break down where Clemson has the advantages, where Kentucky could have some places where they could take advantage. But we talked about the guys who are not going to be there, and then we just touched on the secondary. But how about some of the guys who could have chosen not to play in this game but have said, you know what, this is our last game, one more time, one last ride, and we're going to be out there. We're going to be out there with our teammates. You've got guys like Tyler Davis, Xavier Thomas, the 6th-year senior who came out and publicly said this university and this team has given so much to me and has been so loyal to me over the last 6 years that I owe it to them to come out and play in one more game. You've got some guys, Will Shipley and Phil Maffa. There was some speculation very early on as to whether Shipley would play, and he's been there from the very beginning, and he'll strap it up on Friday afternoon. So you've got some guys who, while you've got the opt-outs, you've got some studs who could have chose not to play in this game who are, and I think they are capable of turning the tide and making a big impact as well.
Right. I think they got to be X factors, especially on the offensive side. With how Clemson's offense has been running, it hasn't really been the best. And especially if you take out a guy like Shipley, who could be so dominant, who is basically lightning in a bottle with the snap of your fingers, he can make a huge play. And the same thing on the defensive side too, with guys like Xavier Thomas. He's made huge X factor plays over his last 6 years as a Tiger. Same thing with even a guy like Justin Maskell, Tyler Davis, a great run stopper as well. So that helps, especially on both sides of the ball. It helps in a great way with stifling this Kentucky attack and ending the season with a win.
Yeah, I think my X factor, and I think this is what everybody's going to say, but I think it needs to be said, is I think Cade Klubnik needs to have a big game, and he needs to have a game running the ball and passing the ball, because this is the final game of the year. Like, we need to have a little bit of hope for next year, right? So I think he needs to play well, and I think the defense the freshmen need to keep that momentum going.
Griffin, you mentioned Xavier Thomas. I think it's a great example of a guy that doesn't need to play in this game. Probably has an opportunity to increase his NFL drafts stock, not only in playing this game, but in coming back this whole entire year. So he's a guy that was unblockable towards the end of the season. If you go back when Clemson was 4-4, in that stretch of games where Clemson was just really dominant and keeping opposing quarterbacks below 50% passing over those last 4 games. A lot of that was the secondary, but a lot of that was Xavier Thomas, who was just disruptive. He was held almost every play, it seemed like, and yet still fought through that. He's a guy that with another big day, I think improves his draft stock. So I expect Xavier Thomas to come out with his hair on fire, and he could be, no pun intended, an X factor here tonight, Friday.
Yeah, agreed 100% on all accounts, guys. Now, let's get into I kind of want to break down the Clemson offense versus the Kentucky defense, and then we'll go vice versa, and we'll look at the way these two sides match up against one another. So, let's talk a little bit about how this Clemson offense, in its current incarnation, the way it stands, is going to stack up against this Kentucky defense. Now, one thing that I do think is really going to help Clemson in this ballgame, look, you've got Shipley, you've got Maffa. The offensive line has found some cohesion, and by all accounts, it looks like Matt Luke has come in and hit the ground running and is really lighting a fire under these guys. So that can only help going into this ballgame. But then you're getting a little bit healthy. A lot of that attrition that you had at receiver, Bo Collins going to the transfer portal notwithstanding, you've got Antonio Williams finally back. He's healthy by all accounts and is going to play. You've got Brandon Spector back. And so when you look at this game compared to who you were able to put out there in Columbia for the South Carolina game a month ago, it's not as much. You're missing some guys, but it's not near as much of a mash unit. So I do think that the Clemson receiving core has a chance to be an impact in this game, particularly if Klubnik is on.
I agree with that. And if you look at the way Kentucky played and how their schedule run, they're a 7-5 team that went through a gauntlet of schedule. You got guys like Georgia and Alabama who they fell victim to. Same thing with teams like Missouri, Tennessee. And the way that all 4 of those teams won is that they just threw the ball, offensive powerhouses. And Kentucky seems to play their own game. They seem to put between 14 and 24 points a game. So as long as Clemson can go over that threshold, which I think could definitely happen, especially with you're getting a guy like Antonio Williams back, you can get Tyler Brown, who has been a huge X factor in the latter half of the season, Jake Brenningstool, who could be a huge red zone threat. Obviously, we know 6'6". And with a guy like Shipley and Maffa too to kind of break that defensive line down, which has been one of the top parts of that Kentucky defense. So for me, I think that the wide receiving core serves as a huge X factor for the offensive side. as long as Cade Klubnik gets the time of the offensive line, which Matt Luke has been able to generate a little bit. I'm excited to see how that group performs on Friday. But I think the wide receiving core is huge in terms of how Clemson plays and the outcome of the game.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I would say that the strength of Kentucky's defense is against the run, which is interesting or important because, of course, that's where Clemson wants to do their damage in running the game with Maffa and Shipley. Kentucky only gives up 114 or so yards on the ground. They're much more susceptible in the back end, and that is in the passing game, which is really Clemson's weakness. I agree with you, Griffin. I think the loss of Bo, you'd like to have all your players, right? And Bo Collins here in 2 days on Friday against Kentucky would be a huge gift for Clemson, but he's not going to be there. But I think get Antonio Williams back. You mentioned Spector. I think that's kind of a wash when it comes to the loss of Bo versus the addition of Antonio. You mentioned Tyler Brown. I mean, who had him on your bingo card for leading Clemson in receiving for the season? In terms of receptions and reception yards, I mean, Tyler Brown was not your guy you had on your bingo card. He's your guy going forward. But if Clemson's going to win the game, much like they did in all of that 4-game streak down the stretch, it's going to be because you can run the football with Phil Maffa and Will Shipley and a little bit of Cade Klubnik as well. And you're going to throw it just enough to keep them off balance. But this game will be won or lost whether Clemson on the offensive line can provide those running lanes for Shipley and Maffa. That's the only recipe until you get some other guys on campus who can catch the ball like Frisbee catching dogs that we used to have at Clemson. Until we get those guys on campus, you're going to have to run the football to win the game.
Yeah, to say that I'm excited to get Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore on campus would be an understatement because, frankly, and we're not going to talk about 2024 tonight, but those to me are going to be day one guys. And I think that the Clemson receiving corps by come August is going to be really good. But, we just need them to be good enough on Friday. Now, the last thing we'll talk about offensively is the trenches. It's the offensive line, and I'm interested to get you guys' take on how you feel that's going to go, because there was a lot more cohesion, and you started to see the results get better, especially over the 4-game winning streak to win the season. And now you've got Matt Luke in there coaching these guys up for the last several weeks leading into this bowl game. So, what's the Matt Luke effect on all of this? And does the offensive line continue to perform at that higher level that we saw down the stretch? Because I think in order to win, they're going to have to.
I think it really helps, too, that the fact that Matt Luke can only focus on one game. I think that makes a little bit of a difference, not as much as, maybe one may think. But they know that if they give Shipley and Maffa the ball and they get success down the field, they're going to win this game. And I think it's just two great things coming together with the way the Clemson offensive line has played as of late and the addition of a great offensive line coach with Matt Luke. So I think the offensive line plays well. Obviously, there's going to be some kinks in the system, like there always is, like the way some Clemson offensive linemen have played. But I don't see this being that much of an issue that people think.
Yeah, and Clifton, we'll let you jump in. You're on mute, buddy.
Yeah. Sorry about that. My dog was barking. So the last time. But yeah, I do think that this game will be won in the trenches, and I think with Matt Luke coming in that it's really going to help out those guys. And you kind of see it in those little videos that some football throws out on Twitter, how, he really digs in and really pushes these guys to get better.
The one thing on offense that we haven't talked about yet that I think will be a key, and it wasn't really an issue with us, and especially in those last 4 games, is the fact that Clemson got better in not turning the football over a lot. And when the turnovers happened, they weren't as catastrophic as they were in some of the losses. I think the offensive line to say that that's going to be some kind of transformation in the bowl game. I don't know that that's going to happen even under Luke, but I love the long-term vision of what he's going to do. But Clemson offensive line got better as the year went on just because they simplified things anyway. And it was because Clemson didn't have as many catastrophic turnovers. They still were there at times, but not catastrophic. And you saw that in the South Carolina game. It was almost like you got about 7, 8, 9 minutes into that game. It was like, you knew you were going to win the game unless you did something stupid. So we're just not going to do anything stupid and run the football. And so I expect there'll be a little bit of that against Kentucky. And if you get a couple of big plays and the score, you get yourself a little breathing room. Maybe you do a little different things offensively, but I think it's a ground and pound kind of game. You're going to just run the football. It's going to be a game where the field position is going to be huge in the game. We may talk about that later, but I think the offensive line transformation that we'll see won't necessarily be drastically different Friday, but I love the long-term effects of the hire. I mean, Dabo's, I think, hit a home run here.
Yeah, agreed. Now you talk about field position, and that's where the Clemson defense comes in. So let's talk about the Clemson defense versus the Kentucky offense. Now, we know who Clemson's without. We also know who they've got. And to me, at least the way I look at it on paper, you still got guys who are big-time impacts throughout the entirety of the season. Xavier Thomas, Tyler Davis, and all of those guys. Barrett Carter, we haven't thrown his name out there yet on the show. Barrett Carter not only playing, but announcing he's coming back for his senior season. So you've got him out there at linebacker. And then, look, you've got some of these true freshmen who were just sensational this year as well. And T.J. Parker at defensive end, Peter Woods there on the interior of the line, and a young man who's really become one of my favorite defensive linemen down the stretch, DeMonte Capehart, has really just stepped in and have been an immovable object. So when I look at this Clemson defense against the Kentucky offense, Scott, you hit the nail on the head. And when you said that Kentucky is a very methodical, plotting team, they don't like to run a lot of plays. I think it plays right into the strength of this Clemson defense, and that the Tigers have plenty enough talent there to still get the job done. I just don't see Kentucky scoring a lot of points in this game.
Yeah, the Wildcats are very below average, to be blunt, offensively. They're 93rd, I think, in rushing and 94th in the country in passing. They're not and in addition to that, they're not a big play offense. They don't make a whole lot of big plays, and I think that all factors into Clemson's favor. You mentioned the loss of the secondary, and look, that's going to be a factor. I mean, Makuba being gone, Makuba not playing, and Wiggins not playing. I mean, those are two guys. They're going to play a long time in the NFL. So I certainly don't want to diminish that. But the reason Clemson was what Clemson was down the stretch, and even in the season, this has been a team that it's fifth in the nation against passing yards. Over the course of the season. It has been a dominant defense. It hasn't necessarily been because of the secondary. It's been because of the play up front. And you mentioned it, losing Rook's a big deal. I mean, he certainly was a factor of that, but Capehart has been a disrupted. TJ Parker has been a man-child, one of the best freshmen in the country. I don't know what they rate stars, when freshmen come out of high school, whether he was a 5-star, 4-star, I kind of lose track of that. Let me tell you, as a freshman, he was a 6-star. I mean, this was a superstar guy. As a freshman, he was everything you wanted him to be. So I think Clemson's interior up front and that linebacker core, even without Jeremiah Trotta Jr., against a team that just doesn't have a whole lot of dynamic players offensively, I expect Clemson defensively to look very similar to what Clemson looked really over the course of the past couple of seasons, but certainly during this season and especially down the stretch.
Yeah, and Griffin, in short, to me, this is just you could not ask for a better matchup for the Clemson defense to put them out there against the offense that they're going to be seeing. Sometimes, matchups are a big part of the game. And to me, this is just a good matchup for Clemson, and it bodes well in their favor.
Yeah, I agree, and I have to agree with what Scott says too. I think that the front seven is going to complement the secondary enough that the lack of depth that the secondary has at the moment isn't really going to matter as much as the depth chart might say. I'm a fan of Peter Woods. I'm a fan of TJ Parker. DeMont Capehart, I think, is going to have a huge year next year, and he could have a huge game today. Or not today, Friday. But I'm just a huge fan of it all. I think you're not losing as many pieces as the ones that you have right now. So I just think that it's going to be a good day. You don't have to worry about pace when it comes to Kentucky. You might be able to disrupt them. As you know, freshmen like A.V. Terrell, Khalil Barnes, they know how to force turnovers now, and Clemson has gotten very good at doing that and turning the turnover margin in their favor. So I think that it's going to be a good day for the Clemson defense. It's just a matter of if the offense can turn points into what the defense gives them.
Yeah, I agree with you about the defense. And what you said at the end there, Griffin, can the offense turn those turnovers if the defense can get turnovers, or when they get turnovers, if they can turn those into points, right? And really, get the score on the board, get some scores.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. So when we go back, just on the whole, when we look at the Clemson offense versus the Kentucky defense, the Clemson defense versus the Kentucky offense, just very quick, let's go down the line here. Who has the advantage where? Let's start with the Clemson offense against Kentucky's defense. Is it advantage Tigers or advantage Wildcats? I'll start off. My opinion is it's to me that's almost a wash.
I'd have to agree with that. I think they're fairly balanced. I think the other side's gonna kind of decide how the game goes.
Mm-hmm. I'm right there with you. I mean, everybody talks about their defensive line, but I think I've heard that over the past couple of days that they have a great defensive line, but I think our defensive line's just as good.
I think statistically, it's a wash on that side of the ball. I agree with all of you. I think maybe if there's an X factor, and I don't know that there is, we'll see on Friday, is that, you give Garrett Riley a couple extra weeks now that he knows his guys and he knows their strengths and weaknesses. One guy we haven't mentioned at all yet is Cade Klubnik. And so, you give him 3 or 4 weeks of extra practice. I think there may be a play or 2 or 3 or 4 that, you get from Cade that you didn't have in the regular season just because of that experience with Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik may be in there. But otherwise, statistically, I agree with you all. I think the offensive side for Clemson versus Kentucky defensively is pretty much a wash. It'll be just who can make the plays when they need to make the plays.
Yeah, agreed with that. Now, the Clemson offense versus the Kentucky defense, and you mentioned Klubnik, and to me, I think Klubnik, for my money, is still a more talented quarterback than Devin Leary. And that's not to take anything away from Leary. And look, has Cade played like it throughout the entirety of the season? Probably not at times. I still think that the talent for Cade is there, whether it's manifested or not. But you talk about these two Clemson running backs, Shipley and Maffa, are just in their own way. They complement each other so well. You've got Shipley, who's the dynamic playmaker with the speed, can catch it coming out of the backfield. You've got Phil Maffa, who can just run behind the offensive line and tenderize you a little bit. And then you start throwing the ball and you set that up off of the run. So who has the advantage on this side of the ball, Clemson's offense versus Kentucky's defense? I just think Clemson is capable of playing with far more tempo. I think they still have some playmakers who can get in space and make things happen. Kentucky being a little bit weaker on the back end, if Clemson can establish the run early, I just think it opens it up for guys like Antonio Williams and Tyler Brown and Jake Brenningstool. I'm giving the advantage here to Clemson's offense. I just think they're better than the defense that they'll see.
I know that Kentucky I think they've only lost 2 starters to the whole transfer portal, NFL draft stuff. But I think Clemson has the better capability to make huge plays. And it's just based off how Kentucky plays. They're not a very big star-studded play. They'll put together a great drive, and that will pretty much be it. I think that Clemson, with guys like Will Shipley, prime example, Phil Maffa too, he's had a couple of house calls this season. I think that I'd have to agree with you. I'd have to give the edge to the Clemson offense here.
Yeah, I'm going to give the edge to Clemson offense too. With, like Scott said earlier, our offensive line is playing a lot better down the stretch. And if the offensive line can block really well, and Klubnik can get the ball to the receivers, and we could see a big day, but who knows?
Well, I think if Cade Klubnik has a great game, I think that certainly bodes well for the Tigers, and certainly the quarterback position is so important in college football altogether. I think these two teams offensively, both Kentucky and Clemson, aren't going to be the deciding factor in the game. I think it's going to be the defensive side of the ball. And I just think Clemson's better defensively than Kentucky is, especially up front. And I think that, to me, is where, if you're looking to kind of tilt this game one way or the other, that's where the game falls.
All right, just going to throw this in there. Lord forbid it comes down to a field goal that wins is on the table to win the game for one side or the other. Who's got the advantage there? Because I can tell you this, I don't know that I would have said this up until about a month and a half ago. I would have said Kentucky by a long way if it comes down to a field goal, but I'll be damned if Jonathan White hasn't come on, and he'll be a Clemson legend forever because he single-handedly beat South Carolina, at least from an offensive standpoint. Was Barnes on defense, and it was White's on offense with those 3 huge field goals. So if it comes down to a field goal, who's winning?
Oh, golly. I think just with the confidence that Jonathan White has, and I think anybody would be on top of the world if you beat your rival and you're kind of the guy that does it. Just because of the whole confidence and the morale that the special teams has been going under, I'll take Clemson there too.
Yeah, I'm going to take Clemson too, with him making those field goals at the end of the during the South Carolina game and pretty much beating them. I think I'm going to go with Clemson.
Garrett, I'm not going to play along. I think, I love Whites, and I think Whites would win. I have all the confidence in Whites to win the game. If there's going to be a special teams deciding factor, I think it's in the punting game. Bradley Pinion, who's been one of the best punters in Clemson football history. I mean, when you look at his yards per punt, I think he's like 4th in Clemson football history in punting. Kentucky's not an offense that can go 80 yards, 85 yards, 75 yards and score a lot of points. So if this thing shakes out, the special teams is the deciding factor, I think it's going to be Bradley Pinion.
No, that's a good one right there. Yeah.
Hey, pin them deep. If you pin them deep and they're not a big play offense, just don't let them out of the shadow of their own goal line. So we'll see how the special teams come into play, but I agree with you 100%, Scott. Field position, you touched on it earlier in the show. That could be a big factor as well. All right, guys, we've broken it down about as best as our feeble minds can do. So it's that wonderful time where we get to throw out some predictions on this ball game. We're less than 48 hours away at. So let's throw some numbers out there, and I'm gonna take up the rear on this one. I'm going to go last. Scott, you're the guest. Floor is yours. What's the score? How does this game shake out?
I think it's a low-scoring game. I just think it's kind of a slodge your way through it. I think it's a field position game. I think the weather's going to be fine, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. But I think, the team that turns the ball over is going to put themselves in jeopardy in that regard. So I don't see a huge discrepancy here in, like a 30-10 kind of game either way. I just think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I'll give my official pregame Tiger PreGame Show prediction on the show on Friday. But I will say this: I do believe that Clemson's a better football team, despite the fact that you've lost a lot of folks in the NFL situation opting out, and then the portal. Pound for pound, ounce for ounce, Clemson's better. And so if you don't turn the football over, Clemson's going to win the game. Now, if you turn the ball over, this thing, who knows what's going to happen. And we've seen that in its full beauty or lack thereof this season and even last season. So if you told me today that Clemson either breaks even or wins the turnover battle, there's no doubt in my mind Clemson wins the game. Everything else, we'll see what happens.
All right, Clifton, your turn to prove that you should be buying my lottery tickets.
Yeah, I'm going to go with I think let's go. I haven't thought about this a lot because I was but let's see if Clemson can score. Let's go 30, 31-24.
All right.
31-24.
A little bit higher scoring. Brave man.
Yeah.
Right. What you got,
Yeah,
Griff?
I'm gonna go Scott's way. I think low scoring. If you're a Clemson fan, it could be a little bit of an uncomfortable one because you're just waiting for, the Tigers to pull away. But Kentucky's gonna stay in it no matter what. I think it's gonna be a fun one. The TV's gonna stay on the whole time. I think that Clemson eventually does prevail. My score prediction will be 21-17 as long as no turnovers go crazy.
All right, well, Griffin, you and I are fairly close to being on the same page, and I was going to say we've got Scott's going low scoring, Clifton's a little bit higher scoring, and Griffin, I think you're a little more in line with the way I was going to go with this. Not too low, not too high, but a little bit in the middle in terms of the score. I do think the Clemson offense is going to do some good things on Friday. I think the defense is going to do its thing. I just don't see Kentucky being that prolific offensively, and so. 3 touchdowns for the Tigers, and Whites is going to end his Clemson career in style. He's going to kick 2 field goals in this one. So Clemson 27, Kentucky 17.
Nice.
Right in my alley. Great minds think alike.
Hey, absolutely.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Well, guys, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say
17. I'll take that. I mean, I think a win's a win's a win, and I think you move on to the off season, and you got a lot of great guys coming in. We didn't talk about that. Maybe we can do this thing again, this podcast again in the spring. But we got a lot of great dudes coming in. I think there's a lot of optimism for 2024 in Clemson. There's just one of those things when you win a bowl game. It doesn't matter whether it's a playoff game or a bowl game. When you win the last game, that just creates a tremendous amount of optimism for the next season. And so I think that's probably the number one key for me is let's find a way to win. Doesn't matter how you do it. And let's create that optimism for 2024.
Yep.
Agree totally. Hey, look, I'll throw this out there. 2014 Russell Athletic Bowl against Oklahoma. I think Clemson was they might have even been unranked coming into that ball game. Deshaun Watson had already had his ACL surgery, but you go out there and you just beat the absolute brakes off of Oklahoma 40-6, and then look where you wound up for the next 5 or 6 years after that, and you came away with 2 national championships. So never underestimate the momentum that a bowl game can build up going in, leaving one season and going into the next. But I think it's going to be a great day on Friday. Hey, and you know what, guys, we didn't even throw this in there. We've got to give a shout out to our sponsor, Arden's Burger Grill, 1280 18 Mile Road Central. Look, just because this game's not being played at Death Valley, you could still go see our friends at Arden's. Get all of your game day food, their double dip wings, mouth-watering burgers, and sizzling grills. Go see our friends at Arden's Burger Grill at 1280 18 Mile Road Central, and they'll hook you up and they'll get your lunch and your game day food taken care of on Friday. And you can tell them that the crew from Around the Paul sent you over there. So, well, Scott, we appreciate it so much you coming on the show tonight. Absolute blast. You're welcome back anytime, and we appreciate your time and candid thoughts.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be a part of it. Happy New Year and go Tigers.
Yep. Hey, Scott, I got one last question. What's it like hanging out with Qualt?
A challenge, a brutal challenge that just takes every bit of patience and humanity that I have. Falk's a great guy, a great broadcaster, and certainly a great Clemson man. So it's a joy to be around him. But hey, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, right?
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, great job, guys. It was a blast. And for everybody, make sure, remember, I said at the very beginning of the show, you are under direct orders now. You have to tune into the Tiger PreGame Show, 6 a.m. on Friday, 105.5 The Roar, as Scott Reimer and William Qualkenbush, they'll get you set up for the game. So brew that pot of coffee. I don't care if it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 cups. Get up,
That's
get
right.
ready for game day. You've got to get your game face on early. We'll have ours on, and we'll be ready to go when the ball's teed up at 12 noon. So until that time, I'm Garrett Mitchell for Griffin Barfield, Clifton Kennedy, and Scott Reimer, our special guest tonight. Again, we thank him so much. This is Around the Paul signing off, saying, Go Tigers.
Go Tigers.
Go Tigers.